of it.
Well, let me give you a little background. That's the year that on July 7th, I was in a collision with Don Hahn against the Atlanta Braves in left center and dislocated my hip, which really changed my career.
I remember Ralph Garr rounding the bases in that.
Yeah. So anyway, I was in the hospital in traction for a month and then on crutches for a month, and the Mets, out of the goodness of their hearts, activated me on the roster in September and kept me on the roster through the National League playoffs against the Big Red Machine, which we won, and even though I didn't play, what an honor. And then to be on the World Series team. So anyway, the fourth game, and I think it was the first night game in Major League history in the World Series, and it's about 37 degrees, and there's a wind, and it's cold. And Cleon is in left field throwing up since about the first inning. Well, when Yogi sent me out after I haven't played a game in 3 months, the first pitch, Sal Bando hits a line drive in the left center field, and not knowing how I did it, I just reacted, went over, reached up and grabbed that ball and threw it in like I knew what I was doing. It was strictly a reaction, and I made the play there. So, and I was telling Doug my knees were chattering, and I don't know if it was because they were cold or because I was nervous, but that's how sports is. You react. You don't. If you think too much, you don't perform.
Sometimes you overthink it a bit, and that's like you say, you don't perform as well. When you bring up 73, I still have a problem with Yogi not using George Stone enough in that World Series. I thought I thought Stone had a tremendous season for the Mets back then, and and it's like a lot of my friends tell me, you think you can give it a rest now? I mean, it's 1973. You were crying about this in junior high school. You're still crying about it today.
Well, I know.
I still second guess Yogi on the misuse of George Stone. But,
yeah, and I don't know what the reasons were that Tom Seaver pitched Game 6 and not George Stone, and I'm not one to second guess it because there's a lot of history and a lot of knowledge there. But
that was my argument. I would have used Stone in 6, and I still have Seaver for Game 7.
He'd be fresher and maybe stronger.
See, George, we think alike. You see that? That makes my argument feel even stronger, knowing that you think the same way I did with that.
But the history that Tom Seaver has done for the Mets, if they went to him and asked him, what do you want to do? I'd do whatever he said.
Oh, yeah.
So if he said, I want to go Game 6, and maybe he did, then that's the way it should have been.
He's still considered the franchise here in New York. He's still, the top player in Met history. So,
someday you ought to get him on your show and not talk about baseball, but talk about real life, and he'll tell you about how he's clipping the vineyards himself and taking care of it. And he says, this is real.
Well, my thrill of I was at the last game at Shea Stadium, and like I said, you got a tremendous ovation when you were introduced. And as we were leaving. Now, this is a stadium where I was going since 1964, since I was 6 years old. And here I'm at the last game with my wife and my 2 children. And it's like, I don't want to leave the place. I don't want it to be torn down. I don't care about it. I wanted to stay there. And my family's telling I said, okay, Dad, it's time to go home. I said, no, I don't want to leave here because I know I'm never going to be back here again. And the last person I got to meet as I left Shea Stadium was Tom Seaver.
Oh.
So after I spoke to him, I shook his hand and I told him, I said, listen, he goes, you're an old timer. I said, it's the first time in my life that I was happy to be called an old timer. It was okay. Because Tom Seaver called me that. So after we shook hands and he left, I turned to my family. I said, okay, now we can go home. I said, no, I have closure. Now. I can go home. I said, I've had lunch with Eddie Kranepool, and the last day at Shea Stadium, I shook hands with Tom Seaver. I said, I'm good now.
That's a great story.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. I only have a few minutes left. And again, I really appreciate you fellas coming on the show. It was great talking to you. Doug, the book is tremendous. I hope a lot of success. I hope a lot of people who are listening tonight, you can get it on Amazon, at Barnes & Noble. It's a bit of
the easiest way, if they want to get more information about the book, and again, I thank you for affording us the chance to come on the show and talk about the book. But the easiest way, go to my website, www.abittercupofcoffee.com. theodore.com. There's a picture of George and myself in the photo gallery. They can just call up my publisher toll free, 1-800-827-7903, 1-800-827-7903, and I'll say something a little hokey. Here we are, not 48 hours from the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and hopefully, we all have a lot to be grateful for, but hopefully men such as George in the not-too-distant future will have even more reasons, and he's got a blessed life out in Utah, but hopefully he'll have even more reasons to consider himself lucky.
And I want to say something to you, Doug. I appreciate all you've done and that you're doing. So, good going. You're a good guy.
Oh, thank you, George.
Yeah, listen, like I said, thank you, gentlemen, for coming on, and have a happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the holiday. And George, once a Met, always a Met. Remember that.
Okay, I'm there all the way through.
Great. Thank you, fella.
All right, thank you.
Good night, Steve.
Good night.
Good night.